Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Q Files. This is a real live broadcast. Obviously, it's the 30th of March, and in Bozeman, Montana today, we have had record temperatures. We're up in the 75 degrees. Now, this is just the end of March. Typically, we don't start seeing 75 until April, the end of April, sometimes even the beginning of May. Reporting from all over the country, especially the West Coast. The West Coast is having record-breaking temperatures, too, so much so that it appears right now that California, which has gone to a stage 1 emergency, if the heat keeps up, they might have to go to rolling brownouts. Now, that's very unusual for, again, this early in the year. Now, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I'm going to talk about chemtrails and chemical spraying, and I'm going to take you to a very secret organization called Majestic 12. Most people only know of Majestic 12 from the standpoint of Eisenhower's appointment during his tenure as president of probably a group of very wise men, and initially it was 12 men, and over the years, Dr. Teller, the inventor, if you will, or the founder of the hydrogen bomb, was the head guy. Now, there's a great, and this is posted on my website, a great overview of everything I'm going to talk to you about tonight by Dr. Michael Castle, and he's calling it The Methodic Demise of Natural Earth, an Environmental Impact Overview. Now, I was contacted by a researcher who has done a fabulous amount of investigation of what really is in the spray. Now, Clifford Carnicom has got a great website. Carnicom is spelled C-A-R-N-I-C-O-M, and you go to carnicom.com, and it's going to give you a lot of photomicrographs and a lot of information. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have to be the dumbest people that have ever been allowed to exist on this planet to, day by day, watch the planes go backwards, to make checkerboards, X's marking the spot for satellite surveillance, to not even question, or I would say this, half-heartedly, dutifully elected representatives, and we have been subjected to the biggest black operation that's ever taken place. Now, Dr. Edward Teller wrote a white paper in the late 1990s describing a remedial operations strategy, and this thing was epic in proportion. You've got to understand, they're not just spraying America and Europe, they're spraying the entire world. Now, listen to this. He wanted to change the predicted course of what was believed by an international group of scientists, including himself and Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, to be the cataclysmic certainty from the results of global warming and crisis-level ultraviolet cosmic radiation. Now, for the record, the sun controls what goes on the Earth. But during the early periods of atomic testing, our rocket scientists, literally in this case under Project Argosy, exploded atom bombs in the Earth's Van Allen radiation belt. So we have been exposed to the after effects of man's lack of knowledge in trying to play God. Now you've got a group of top secret guys, and by the way, Dr. Teller passed away less than a year ago, I believe, and I don't know who is the head of Majestic 12 right now. And the point that I want to make on this is that whether you believe it or not, there are a group of incredibly brilliant and, in some cases, supernaturally sinister individuals deciding the outcome of the planet. Now, I'm on record as stating, when you read the book of Revelation, we're not going to deal with a new ice age, contrary to what Hollywood is saying. We're going to deal with a time period where it's literally going to be hotter than the hell that will follow it. And I'm not talking about, in this case, the place or the abode of the damned. I'm talking about heat and temperatures and a superactive sun that are going to basically shake and bake the planet. Now, I want to continue on with the white paper because this is important. Okay, demonstrating here that the same mind that Dr. Edward Teller, the father of the H-bond, was responsible for many ill-conceived strategies, and not one gave consideration to the consequences in the human realm. In other words, one thing is interesting, that some of these scientists can so hypothecate and basically put forth theories, and people will go with it if it sounds good, that they never really figure out that there are secondary, tertiary, or quaternary responses that they may not have considered. So the bottom line is the global warming, the crisis that was concerned with excess UV, cosmic radiation, and ozone layer depletion, and, quote, other theoretical doom. And by the way, theoretical doom was what he wrote about, that the point that what Dr. Castle brings out is that the safety, the toxicity, the lethality, the exposure, environmental impact, morality were not words which Dr. Teller had a high degree of familiarity. Now, these global warming mitigation strategies, UV mitigation, cessation of the effects of the atmospheric greenhouse gases, were given a commonality by Teller et al., and this was the use of a sub-micron particulate, barium, aluminum, or as the British say, aluminium, thorium, and selenium were to be processed into a sub-micron particle dispensed from high-altitude aircraft ionized with a specific electrical charge. We must surmise that ionization would keep the specific heavy metal particulate aloft for longer periods of time. This electronically charged particulate matrix might also be the perfect RF, or radio frequency, control field. Theoretically, the heavy metals would block and reflect the sunlight from entering the Earth's atmosphere and reflect 1 to 2% of it back into space. Ultraviolet radiation levels would decline. Teller also recommended the use of commercial aircraft as well as military aircraft to carry out the enormous and epic task of coverage of the Earth's stratosphere. We believe that the weaponization use of these technologies has been well demonstrated for a United States Department of Defense program entitled RF Dominance, and the U.S. Air Force VTRP and the Navy's RFMP are other military programs utilizing aerosolized heavy metal particulates, including aluminized fiberglass or chaff, and they are characteristic of current military operations. Now, the CIA had a project called Cloverleaf, which was basically the aerosolized heavy metal particulate operations. Massive spraying of the upper atmosphere stratosphere commenced. The U.S. DoD, Department of Defense operations, soon followed, and the U.S. Air Force became embedded in the overall operation strategically. The U.S. Air Force would also play significantly into the expansion of a significant global warming mitigation strategy in the form of weather modification and geoengineering practices. Now, just to put this into perspective for you, there are so many patents out there that they're classified patents, but they're open source patents. And Kent Steadman on his cyberspace orbit, let me spell that, C-Y-B-E-R space S-P-A-C-E orbit, all one word, ORBIT.com, has a listing of Bernard Eastland's patents, and a lot of people have provided other patents that talk about weather modification and control. Now, I want to take you to the scientist right off the top that has sent me a fascinating discovery. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's say, and if you will, you've listened to me long enough to know that I believe that supernatural intelligences, non-human, have been in collusion with not only our Pentagon, but the world's war makers to lead the United States and other nations to the brink of destruction. Jesus Christ himself stated in Matthew 24 that if it were possible, even the elect would be deceived, but because if the days weren't shortened, there'd be no flesh left alive, yet for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. These are the days we're living in. And when I read this to you, you're going to have to understand the ramifications of what is being stated. Initially, let me set it up for you. Initially, it was to be a weather modification and RF induction field. Now, also understand that when we're going to see 3D lasers and holographic imagery in the great deception of planet Earth that we've never seen before, the continual suspension of reflective particulate matter in the upper atmosphere aids and abets the great con job that the devil is going to do. The devil is not God. He does not have the power to create ex nihilo out of nothing, but he certainly has the wisdom and the hatred for humanity to deceive and destroy it. Now, here's what the letter said that I received. It's amazing. The person says, "Dear Steve, I have 2 samples and have left one exposed air and one covered, and the exposed one has become brittle. This almost seems to be a mix of plastic and paraffin. Now listen to this. This is a scientist that actually went out when a spray plane was over them on the west coast, and one of the nozzles of the jet that was spraying evidently jammed up, and globules of the spray, instead of being dispersed, descended over the town in which this person lives. They went out and got samples immediately, and they began to put them under microscopic examination and start to take a look at it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is something that is really going on. Listen to this. There are at least 2 kinds of bugs, and I'm possibly looking at a third kind. Definitely looks like some kind of mite, but have not positively identified what kind. The other bug is a 2-colored orange and tan bug that looks like nothing I have seen before, and I'm having a hard time in my research looking for something that even looks similar. This person years ago worked for a private corporation that was contracted by the Department of Defense to basically study the effects of biological weapons dispersal throughout the country. Keep in mind, that's like almost 75, 79, somewhere in there. So try and follow this, because I'm reading it word for word. It says this: the other bug is a 2-colored orange and tan bug that looks nothing like what I've ever seen before, and I'm having a hard time in my research looking for something that even looks similar. Remember, initially under Teller's program and some of the different programs, including Operation Cloverleaf, it was inorganic matter that was being sprayed. Now it's changed to organic matter. And if you don't understand the ramifications of this, I will spell them out. But this is so horrendous and so horrific that we're talking about genetically mutating life forms that are interfering with us and that are basically designed to kill us. End of story. There also seems to be some kind of a tan neuron. It was totally wrapped in the delivery agent. There were filaments of black, red, and this red has a coloration of dried blood, and the pictures, it looks like a true red. And Cliff Carnicom and others have analyzed those as basically hemoglobin. So we're going to get to the rest of this, and it's fascinating. Now, she says this, too, that there's green and yellow, and some parts of these have a very shiny film on them, and have not been able to identify this substance yet, and on some of them, the red and yellow just blend together. There are thousands of what look like eggs. They are the color of larvae, and within a couple of days, they have actually begun to turn a clearer brown color, but I have not seen anything hatching out of them yet. They seem to be growing to a certain size and then just disappearing. And you can see the open, empty shells of some of the white larva-looking eggs after this has happened. There are also some crystalline structures that I've had a very hard time photographing because they have such an illumination to them. There is a clear liquid that within days began to divide into cells. In the pictures you will see them actually within days move away from each other. While I couldn't see the substance on anything, it has appeared from something and continues to move away from each other after it is divided. There is also the presence of, again, dried blood cells around the areas where this substance appears. Understand, this is what I'm going to call them, and for the person listening, you can use this too, but we're going to call them vampire mites. Evidently, they need the nutrition that is in the hemoglobin and the blood cells to reproduce. Now, if you don't understand how incredibly amazing this is, how incredibly insipid, insidious, wicked, disgusting, disastrous, and destructive, I don't know how to put it in any simpler terms. Again, I am absolutely astounded by some of the morons and some of the bulletin boards that just don't get this. Absolutely cannot even imagine it. So all they can do is attack the whole thing of chemtrails, yet they won't get off their lazy butts and go do their own homework and find out the degree of respiratory disease that has increased in this country since the chemtrail issues started to arise. And by the way, you won't get any answers from them. Them happens to be the guys that are doing it. Now, imagine, if you will, an organic life form that is deriving substance from the blood, and then imagine something that is genetically altered to integrate into it human DNA, and you'll get the worst kind of scientific nightmare that you can even imagine. Let me go on. The person says this. Okay. After these things have divided and there's the presence of dried blood, they go on to say, which brings me to another egg-like structure that looks like it also has been dividing, and there are two of them, one divided into 2 cells and one into 4. This almost looks like red salmon eggs that you used to go fishing with, just like they look in the jar when they're all stuck together. They are a red color also, and this is what I found so far. She said, next thing we'll be doing is looking for virus cells, dead or alive, and to watch the progression of what these eggs are doing. And this person, again, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very dedicated, and I want to thank the person for sending me this. And she said, my major is chemistry, and I've worked in the medical field, and I've been a researcher, and she worked for a defense contractor who was testing wind patterns in case of biological attack and also the cloud, and they were seeding clouds in the early days. So, if you want to send me your take on this, you can send it to me on my email. But I want to get back to the article that Dr. Castle wrote because it's kind of fascinating. Now, he states that federal-approved contractors became involved in this massive global effort to save Earth from certain doom. Federal-approved contractors were part of the research, development, deployment aspects of these projects. Many of them have visited the premier website. Thorium and oxides, aluminum and silicon carbide, have been identified in a special mixture referred to generally as the Welsbach refractory seeding agents, U.S. patent number 5003186. This patent was assigned and awarded in 1990 to Hughes Aircraft Corporation. The Welsbach refractory seeding under unrestricted deployment operations began in the early 1990s over a vast area of the stratosphere above the North American continent. Expanding over the entire Western Hemisphere, many operations were believed to have been enjoined into the ozone depletion mitigation aerial operations of the U.S. Air Force connected to HAARP, or High Frequency Active Aurora Research Project for ionospheric heating located in Alaska. Ozone remediation was one of 3 active mission parameters for HAARP as defined by Dr. Bernard Eastland, inventor of the director of HAARP. The ionospheric heating research facility was manned and operated by the U.S. Air Force Reserve and the U.S. Navy. HAARP had then been weaponized, therefore all operations were and remain classified. Now again, weather modification and climate change. Now I want to take you to something that was written by Tom Bearden. Again, most people, I find, cannot even begin to embrace the idea of technologically manipulating the weather. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you wanted to manipulate the weather and wanted to kill the maximum amount of people, you could do it. If you started messing with the weather patterns, you could ultimately decide the fate of literally not millions but billions of people due to the F word, and that word is food. Happens to be an F word that we all need. And the reason I say that is because we have forgotten, with the media's attention to the obscene words that start with that letter, that the basis, the staff of life, is literally being broken before our eyes. And this whole food issue is going to become incredibly important. Let me read to you what Tom Bearden wrote to Kent Steadman. He said, first in 1997, then Secretary of Defense William Cohen specifically and publicly confirmed that electromagnetic weapons were being used by terrorists to initiate earthquakes, modify the climate and the weather, and initiate volcanoes into eruption. So far as I'm aware, the news media did not even report this first ever public confirmation by a high U.S. official of the old scalar interferometer weapons, which have been around in extensive use since April of 1963. That's 41 years. Today, some 10 nations have such weapons or versions of them, and even the Japanese Yakuza has acquired them in late 1989. Now, the Yakuza is Japan's mafia, equal to, the Cosa Nostra, the mafia. But what you don't understand, everyone, is that for a price, the Russian mafia will do whatever you want them to do to the weather in whatever part of the country or world you want. I once had a sit-down meeting with a guy who represented himself as someone that could get anything out of the former Soviet Union And I asked him just what a local weather modification machine was going for, and he said something that could control 20 miles. He said he would make a deal. $16,000. He said $16,000, Steve. $16,000. So, ladies and gentlemen, you know, those days they didn't have to have a catalog. Whatever existed was available for a price. Again, I find it inane that people who are absolute mental midgets and quasi-morons will obviously always attack issues like this without doing their homework. I remember watching one forum, and the deal is that there was actually a fight. One guy said, well, because I don't believe tectonic weapons exist, therefore they don't exist. Until some of the other readers who are much brighter and bolder said to him, go look at this patent, go look at that patent. Well, the guy grudgingly acknowledged that maybe they exist. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to quit having a piddle contest, or whatever it's called, and start to get down to the nitty-gritty. We are being systematically attacked by genetically altered microorganisms. It appears now that they have put into the deadly brew from above what I'm calling the vampire mites. It's fascinating that they literally live or are fed by human blood. Now, again, this is absolutely beyond remarkable. This is absolutely beyond astonishing. And, you know, it's fascinating because I talk to pilots all the time, even pilots that don't believe this. I say, okay, what's your altitude restrictions flying east to west? And they'll tell me we have to fly at this altitude, and we fly west to east, it's a different altitude. I say, okay, do you have to file flight plans? Well, absolutely. Do you have to stay within designated flight corridors? Well, absolutely. I said, then you explain to me how tic-tac-toe and X is marking the spots, and that you can have 21 aircraft in a flight pattern going both east to west and north to south. And I said, who can that be if you guys in the commercial sector? Well, I guess it has to be the military then. And I said, therefore, if it has to be the military, do you assume that since this phenomenon began and the disease associated with it, that there might be a program that is both overt, obvious, and covert, hidden? Well, they'd never do that. And then basically sometimes I just send out my book, Breathe No Evil. In the back, there's all the different experiments that have gone on. Do you guys out there listening to this broadcast, do you get it? Please, I want some emails. Do you understand that we are not only being experimented on? Do you understand that this is a multifaceted program? What once basically was construed to be a ultraviolet remediation effort now has turned into a genetically modified organism dispersal. And if you understand that the weather issues associated with HAARP and some of the electromagnetic weaponry, the scalar weaponry, etc., is absolutely turning this planet into a boiling hellhole. And in that boiling hellhole, the food of life, literally, and the water. You know, it's interesting because even in Montana, we some years used to get tons of snow. Talking to the guys that go out and fly in helicopters and actually measure the moisture content of the snow, they said the moisture content of the snow is really, really low. Now, what that means is, you and I look at snow and we go, man, that's like 10 feet of snow. There's got to be a lot of water in that. Ain't so, Sybil. The point is that, again, through weather modification and scalar interference with weather patterns and directed bad weather, if you will, or inclement weather or deadly weather, the powers that be, including mafias. Now, according to Tom Bearden, there are 10 nations that have this right now. Even the Aum Shinrikyo, the guys that were responsible for the sarin nerve gas attack in Tokyo, and whose beloved leader has been given the death sentence, they were known to be acquiring this type of weaponry. So if you take the 10 nations, including China, my question is always, how do I say this, always been the same. What happens when everybody, so to speak, lights up at the same time? Now, it's kind of amazing to me, and I want to give you a little extra understanding of this. Now, if I can explain this simply, and I got to share this with you. I am not the physicist. I'd get Stan Deo on. Tom Bearden won't do talk radio right now because of his health. I don't know that he'll ever do it. But listen to this. scalar interferometrics can and does induce electromagnetic fields, potentialed and structured electromagnetic energy to occur in the distant interferometry zone. That's where different signals come together. This normal electromagnetic energy that is produced there arises directly out of the local space-time, which has been modified and curved by the interferometry. The energy that arises in the interference zone can deliberately be made divergent heating or convergent cooling, steering the jet streams over North America and thus changing and influencing the weather and climate thus becomes straightforward. Producing distant hot spots in interferometric zones will heat and expand the local air, so it will exert less pressure on the ground. That is the creation of a low pressure zone. Producing distant cold spots in other interferic zones will cool and densify the local air, so it exerts more pressure on the ground. That is the creation of a high pressure zone. Jet streams tend to be deviated or repelled by highs and attracted by lows. Hence, by placing a desired set of highs and lows in corresponding interferometric zones and slowly moving them along, a set of distant operators and interferometers can capture and direct the flow of the jet streams across North America or anywhere else in the world.